Law without government. How could that work? To explain it, I'll start with definitions and principles, then look at a practical example of how a crime is dealt with in a society with law but without government, then end by talking about how laws emerge through a market process in the absence of government, and what kind of laws we could expect from a society with law but without government. Let's start by defining law. Laws are property rules that emerge from the resolution of conflicts. Two facts about the world explain why laws exist: scarcity of resources and diversity of interests between individuals. These two facts mean there is always a potential for interpersonal conflicts about resource usage. Take an apple. If two people both want to eat it and not share it, they cannot both be satisfied. For conflict avoidance, we need property rules to establish who has the ownership right over the apple. That is, who has the right to decide how the apple is used. The production of these property rules, or laws, is the law industry. Laws emerge from the services provided by arbitrators asked for their opinion to help resolve a conflict. Now let's define government, which I'm using here interchangeably with the word state. Government is a territorial monopolist over law. It is the sole provider of law, the ultimate decision-maker and arbitrator within a territory. Monopolies can only be maintained using force, and this is how a government operates. It uses its monopoly of law to exempt itself from rules about the use of force. For example, they declare that stealing is legal when they do it, and they call it taxation. So in the field of law, just like every other industry, you can have competition or you can have monopoly. When you have monopoly, that's government. When you have competition, that's anarchy. Now let's see this in action, starting with the simplest possible society. Two people on a desert island, Adam and Ben. They could either live in isolation from each other, or they could interact. The interaction could be violent, such as one man killing or enslaving the other, but is more likely to be peaceful, as both men will see the benefit in peaceful interactions, such as friendship, joint projects, or trade. Let's suppose they live peacefully, but now they have a conflict. Adam picks some apples from a tree that Ben considers his own. Ben tells Adam to go and find his own apple tree, or offers to trade him some apples. Adam replies that Ben has no legitimate claim to own the tree, so he did nothing wrong by picking some apples off it. They have a falling out. With no one else on the island, Adam and Ben have no one they can turn to for help resolving this conflict. Maybe they will have a physical fight about it, or maybe they will just leave each other alone going forward. But now suppose a third individual is on the island, Charlie. Now there is a new possibility. Ask Charlie for his opinion and agree to whatever resolution he suggests. This is third-party dispute resolution. Adam and Ben both make their cases to Charlie. Charlie must decide who he believes has the stronger claim to the apple tree, and then suggest a resolution that he feels will serve justice and maintain peaceful relations on the island. Charlie might decide Ben rightfully owns the tree, so Adam should give back the apples and apologize, and maybe make amends for his theft by giving Ben some compensation. Or Charlie might decide no one owns the tree, so apples can be freely picked from it, so Adam gets to keep his apples and Ben is in the wrong for preventing Adam from picking the apples. Or maybe Charlie will find a compromise between the two positions, so Adam gets to keep the apples that he already picked, but is not allowed to pick any more. Whatever Charlie decides, one party is going to be disappointed, but still has the strong incentive to accept the decision for the sake of continued peaceful interactions. In rendering his opinion about ownership of a disputed property, Charlie has produced a law. The island now has its first law. That tree is Ben's, or that tree is freely available for anyone to pick apples from, whatever Charlie decided. Now suppose later Adam has a dispute with Charlie about some fish. If they cannot resolve it themselves, they may ask Ben for his opinion. The same process happens, so now Ben has produced a law about fish. And then when Ben and Charlie have a dispute, they may ask Adam to produce a law for them. Here we have a society with law, but without government. There are laws, but there is no monopolist producing them. Everyone is of equal status with respect to the laws. What would a monopoly of the production of law be like on our island? Let's suppose that after producing a law for Adam and Ben, Charlie decided he wants to be the monopolist of law. So when he gets into a dispute with Adam over some fish, he refuses to take it to Ben. Charlie says that he is the only person who produces laws on this island, so he is going to arbitrate on his own case. Unsurprisingly, Charlie makes a law that says he gets to keep the fish. If Adam and Ben accept this situation, then Charlie is now a government. He is the final decision maker in all disputes, even the ones he is involved in. Now we no longer have a society where everyone is of equal status with respect to the laws. We have a ruler who is above the law because he makes all the laws, and everyone else is ruled. It is a master-slave relationship between the ruler and the ruled. Adam and Ben are no longer free. Why would Adam and Ben accept this situation? Isn't it obvious Charlie is just a tyrant, a scoundrel, a bully? They may begrudgingly accept the situation because they fear the use of force from Charlie. But even better from Charlie's perspective would be if he can convince them that a ruler is necessary for social order, and that he is their rightful ruler. Because he is outnumbered, this kind of propaganda is necessary for Charlie to maintain his position as a monopolist of law. So, any society which has 3 or more people can have laws. Those laws can be produced freely by anyone. We call that a stateless or free society. Or those laws can be produced by a monopolist, a government, a bully that has taken over society. Let us do one more thought experiment on our desert island. But this time there are 11 people in the society. 2 of them have a dispute about some coconuts. They need a third party to help them. Now there are 9 people they can choose from. They could take their dispute to any of them. On what basis will they choose somebody? The most important requirement is that it must be someone impartial. There is no point taking a dispute to someone who is obviously going to favour one party over the other, like a family member. Other qualities would be that they have a reputation for being fair, honest and wise. The disputants want a serious opinion that they can respect. As the population grows and the division of labour intensifies, some individuals who possess these qualities may find that they can make a living purely by providing third-party dispute resolution services. They will be professional arbitrators. They may create firms selling these services. Their customers will be disputants who need help resolving a conflict. Their income will depend on their reputation for making wise and fair decisions. These arbitrators and law providers are not rulers. None of them is in a privileged position. If someone has a dispute with an arbitrator, that dispute is taken to a different arbitrator. If one of the arbitrators started to abuse his position by ruling on a case involving himself or taking a bribe, his power is quickly checked by his competitors, the other arbitrators. Any of them would happily rehear the case and make an unbiased ruling on it. Once the wannabe tyrant arbitrator has been exposed, he loses his reputation and his livelihood. It is the best imaginable system of checks and balances on power. Now we move into part 2 of the video. We've discussed definitions and principles. Now we're going to leave the desert island and consider the real, modern, complex world. Whenever an industry has been under the control of a monopoly for a long time, it becomes hard to imagine how it could be done differently by freely competing firms. We currently live in a world of governments, monopolists of law, out-of-control arbitrators making laws in conflicts involving themselves. The principles we discussed of equality under the law and competition between providers may all sound good, and it may work on a small scale, but what would that be like in practice, in the real world? To explain it, I'm going to take the perspective of an ordinary person living in a hypothetical world with laws but without government. Meet Alice. Alice pays a monthly subscription to a company called Dawn Defense, a protection agency. In return, if Alice ever becomes a victim of a crime, all she needs to do is contact Dawn Defense for assistance. Let's say that Alice becomes a victim of a crime. Some money is stolen from her. At the earliest opportunity, she calls the emergency number supplied by Dawn Defence. If she is in danger, security agents will be sent to her immediately. Alice describes the events, the attacker, and her losses to Dawn Defence investigators. Dawn Defence quickly pays out suitable compensation to Alice. Alice has chosen Dawn Defence because they are a reputable provider of these services. They are known to respond very quickly in emergencies, to take care of their customers in difficult circumstances, to pay out quickly and generously when one of their customers becomes a victim of a crime, and to effectively pursue justice on behalf of their customers. Alice cares about all these things. Companies like Dawn Defence exist to serve the demands we all have for security, law, and justice. These companies suffer financially when one of their customers is a victim of a crime. They have a strong incentive to identify and catch the criminal, to satisfy demands for justice, and to recover their cost of having to pay compensation to Alice. Dawn Defence employs skilled detectives to identify criminals. They conclude that Bill was the thief. They issue him a fine. Pay up or force will be used to make you pay up. Bill could admit his guilt and accept his punishment, or he could protest his innocence. Dawn Defence takes great care to not use force against innocent people, so it will take Bill's claims of innocence seriously. They need to be sure they have the right person. Let's take the simplest case first. Bill's arguments are unconvincing. He is obviously guilty, and no one is willing to defend him. If he still refuses to pay, Dawn Defence will go ahead and use minimal force against Bill. Acting as agents of Alice the victim, this use of force is retaliatory, not aggressive. But let's suppose it's not so clear-cut. Bill subscribes to his own protection agency called Tanner Justice, a competitor of Dawn Defence. As soon as Bill gets accused of a crime, he's on the phone to Tanner Justice, telling them that he is innocent and being unjustly accused and threatened with force by Dawn Defence. Tanner Justice calls Dawn Defence to see what evidence they have. They conduct their own investigation to see whether their customer is truly being unjustly threatened with force here, because he is innocent, or is being justly threatened with force, because he is guilty. If Tanner Justice conclude Bill is guilty as well, they will back down and advise him to pay up. Then we're back to the previous situation with no one to defend Bill. If Tanner Justice conclude Bill is innocent, they will defend him. They will consider the threats made by Dawn Defence to be aggression against their customer, rather than retaliation on behalf of Alice. In this situation, the two protection agencies need to find some peaceful resolution to this conflict. So they will ask the opinion of a third party. Naturally, there are firms in the market that provide this service of helping to resolve conflicts between the protection agencies. These are the court agencies. Dawn Defence and Tanner Justice will have a prior agreement about which court to use. Let's say they agree to go to a court agency called Benson Enterprises. This firm will examine the evidence and arguments expertly presented by the two sides. They will offer their opinion. If the court opines that Bill is guilty, Tanner Justice will back down. If the court opines that Bill is innocent, then Dawn Defence will be made to apologise to Bill, cancel the fine, and pay him compensation for the false accusation and threat. And that is how crime is dealt with in a society with law but without government. The difference between this and government is competition versus monopoly. Here there is competition at all levels, impelling excellence, delivering value for customers. The court agencies compete over how well they resolve disputes between protection agencies. Above all, they must maintain their reputation for being impartial, honest, fair and wise. They are being paid to offer a just opinion. Any court can retry a case, and if an injustice is revealed, the responsible court will be shunned by the protection agencies, whether it is due to incompetence or corruption. Each court serves as a check and balance on the power of all the competing courts. The protection agencies compete to provide for their customers the best all-round protection service. It will be insurance-based, and the protection agencies will compete on all aspects of the package deal they provide, including home security, self-defense, guards, emergency services, investigators, internal courts, lawyers, debt collectors, and law enforcers. In this story, the two protection agencies performed several distinct functions in-house, but these functions may well be outsourced to specialized firms. The market will find the optimal way of structuring the industry. Then there are the watchdogs providing consumer advice, auditors checking due process is followed, and the media, all competing for a hint of corruption or incompetence by the protection agencies or courts, forcing them to be consistent and transparent. It is all oriented to satisfying the consumer demand for security, law, and justice. Just like every industry where there is free market competition, what gets demanded is what gets produced. Through competition between court agencies in a stateless society, laws emerge. Now we're going to part 3 of this video, where I'll go more in depth on the market process of how laws emerge in a stateless society, the economics of the law industry, the mechanism by which consumer demands for laws will be translated into the laws that are provided by the protection agencies. The conflict we looked at between Alice and Bill and their respective protection agencies was a disagreement about circumstances, the identity of the thief, what events really took place. They disagreed on whether Bill was the guilty person, so they used a third party to help them resolve it. What they both agreed upon was that theft is a crime, that whoever committed theft against Alice should be brought to justice, and that the amount of the fine was a just punishment. They agreed on all the principles involved. They only disagreed about the circumstances. So now let's take the opposite example, where both sides fully agree on the circumstances, but the disagreement is about a principle. To make the example as extreme as possible, let's say the disagreement is about whether capital punishment is suitable for murderers. Bill murdered Alice. Neither protection agency disputes this fact. This dispute is not about what is true, but what is just. The disagreement is that Dawn Defense is in favour of the death penalty for murderers, while Tanner Justice is opposed. There can be no compromise here. A third-party opinion is of no use. The protection agencies are not going to be able to agree on a court to approach. Dawn Defense has advertised itself as pro-capital punishment. It has promised its customers that it will seek the death penalty against anyone guilty of murder. They could potentially lose lots of customers if Bill, the murderer of Alice, their customer, is not executed. Tanner Justice is anti-capital punishment. It has promised its customers it will seek to protect them, even when they are guilty of murder, against anyone who threatens them with the death penalty. They could potentially lose lots of customers if they cannot prevent Bill from being executed. This kind of dispute gets resolved by a stand-down payment being made from one firm to the other. The direction and size of the stand-down payment depends on the bargaining power of the two firms. Here's a numeric example of how these stand-down payments work. Suppose Dawn Defense estimates that if it backs down in this case, it will lose $1 million worth of revenue from customers who abandon them because they cannot deliver on their pro-death penalty position. This means they will be willing to pay up to $1 million to ensure that Bill gets the death penalty, so that they would hold on to those customers. Tanner Justice similarly estimates how many customers they would lose by backing down. They estimate it will lose them $500,000 in revenue, so they would be willing to pay up to $500,000 to stop the execution. So the two sides come to an agreement. Dawn Defense offers to pay $800,000 to Tanner Justice if they will stand down in this case and allow them to execute Bill. Tanner Justice accepts the offer, because if their estimates are correct, they gain $300,000 from the deal. Dawn Defense is better off by $200,000 from retaining those customers. As with any voluntary trade, both parties benefit from this agreement. Consumers as a group benefit too, because they were willing to pay $1 million for Bill to be executed, but only willing to pay $500,000 for him to avoid execution. The reason Dawn pays Tanner, and not the other way round, is that Dawn had more to lose by not getting their way. In this hypothetical, capital punishment for murderers is the more popular viewpoint. Since Dawn and Tanner are both reputable firms in a mature market, they do not negotiate these stand-down agreements case by case. They have standing agreements about how to handle each situation and regular stand-down payments. This way everyone knows what will happen in advance and consumers can make an informed choice. Tanner openly declares that while it will not enforce the death penalty itself, they will also not be able to defend their customers from the death penalty if they murder a customer of Dawn Defense. For another type of crime, Dawn and Tanner may have a different stand-down agreement. Perhaps Dawn Defense is in favour of corporal punishment against violent offenders, while Tanner thinks imprisonment is a more suitable punishment. Maybe the majority in this case agree with Tanner, so Tanner makes a regular payment to Dawn, so that the Tanner way is upheld. Dawn Defense customers who support corporal punishment will have to settle for knowing that it will not be used if the violent offender is protected by Tanner. The pattern of payments between these two firms could be complex if they have many disagreements with each other about crime and punishment principles. And there will not just be two protection agencies in society, but many. Each pair of agencies will have a set of stand-down agreements with each other for any principled disagreements. Agencies that have the same policy as each other can pool their resources to secure beneficial agreements with the protection agencies they have a mutual disagreement with. For example, all the anti-capital punishment agencies could bid as a group against all the pro-capital punishment agencies for an agreement that capital punishment will not be used against their customers. So this is how consumer demand for laws ultimately determines the laws enforced in a stateless society. It is a market process, the products of which are superior to products of the political process. So we can expect laws that emerge from this market process to be superior to laws produced by governments. We can make predictions about what would be illegal in a stateless society by asking, are people going to be willing to pay for that law to be enforced? A drug or gun prohibition law may sound appealing when the costs are spread across all taxpayers, but will be less so when the costs are borne only by the individuals who choose to pay for it. A protection agency trying to enforce a prohibition law would have to charge customers significantly more to cover the cost of enforcing the law. Principally the cost of attaining stand-down agreements with the competing protection agencies that promise to protect gun owners and drug owners from violations. My prediction is that most people will consider only libertarian laws to be good value for money in the marketplace for laws. This is how law without government will tend towards libertarianism.
Hey, an alien!
Yes, I've travelled across space to check on the progress of your species.
Cool. Shall I take you to our leader?
Your what?
Our leader, the guy in charge.
The guy in charge of what?
Well, in charge of everything.
You have one guy in charge of everything?
No, he's in charge of government.
What is government?
Well, government makes the rules for us. It tells us what we can do and what we can't do.
So is government really smart? They come up with wise rules for you to follow?
Well, mostly. But some of its rules are really stupid.
Do you disregard those rules?
No, we have to follow the rules, even if they are stupid or we disagree with them. Government punishes anyone who disobeys the rules.
So you are slaves to government?
No, it's not like that at all. Government works for us, the people. It serves us. We're the boss.
It tells you what to do, and it punishes you with violence if you disobey it, and yet you're its boss?
Yeah.
But there are some things government does that you don't like.
Well, yeah, not everything government does is popular, like spending on wars, for example.
What is a war?
It's when government basically spends the people's money on weapons and soldiers and then sends them over to the other side of the world to kill a bunch of people over there and destroy their country. I don't like it that government does this.
Well, I can see why you might not like that. Have you humans reached the stage where you generally consider stealing, enslaving, and killing each other to be bad things?
Oh yeah, we know that. Don't steal, don't attack, don't assault.
But you give money to government and they use it to kill people.
Well, yeah. But government does good things with tax money as well.
Why don't you stop paying for the things you don't like and only pay for the good things it does?
No, we can't do that. You can't just decide to stop paying taxes because the rules say that everyone has to pay taxes.
But the rules come from government though, don't they?
Yeah.
So government made a rule which says that everyone has to pay them money. So everyone pays taxes because if they didn't, government would punish them using violence?
Well, yes, but most people don't mind paying taxes. Most people feel obligated to pay taxes and obey government laws because it's for the good of society. Society needs government, and that means we all have to pay taxes.
So just to make sure I've got this straight, government makes the rules and you feel obligated to follow the rules, even the ones you don't like, and it tells you what to do and threatens to punish you if you don't do what it says, and it uses some of the money that it's taken from you using threats of violence to pay for things you don't like and actually think are immoral, like mass murder.
Yeah, but we can ask it to please tell us to do smart things, and please don't take our money and use it to kill people. We're allowed to ask them to tell us to do what we want them to tell us to do.
Are you guys just scared of this thing? Is government some huge monster that can just squish you at any moment if you disobey?
No, government isn't a monster.
Well, what is it then? Could you draw me a picture of it?
Government isn't really the sort of thing you can draw a picture of.
Maybe you could take me to it. Where is government?
You mean the building?
Government is a building.
No, but the politicians who make up the government have buildings they work from.
So government is a group of these politicians.
Yeah.
Okay, so what species are these politicians?
Well, they're human.
Like you?
Yeah.
So politicians are humans and they're government. You're a human, but you're not government.
No.
So it's the politicians, they're the ones that boss the rest of you around and make you do things you don't want to do and take your money using threats of violence. But even though you're all humans, you're not allowed to boss them around and take their money?
No, they'd put us in a cage if we did that. But look, it's not like the politicians can just do whatever they want. Like, a politician can't just come up to me on the street and make me give him money. They can't do that. Politicians can only do things like that in their job, when they're working for government.
Oh, so politicians aren't government, they just work for government.
Yeah.
Okay, so government isn't a monster, and it isn't a building, and it's not politicians, it's something else. And it employs politicians, who are just regular humans, who get to order everyone else around and take their money. How does a regular human become a politician?
Well, that's the great thing about our government. It's a democracy, and that means that the people actually have the power, because we get to decide who among us get to be the politicians. We get to vote. And if a politician starts doing things we don't like, we can just replace him with someone else at the next election.
So the people that get chosen to be politicians only get to boss people around and take their money for a short time, and then they go back to being regular humans?
Exactly.
That sounds like a powerful position to be in. But if you get to choose who does that, I assume that politicians are always the wisest, most honest, caring and respected people among you.
Well, no, not really. I wouldn't say politicians are known for being honest, or wise, or caring. And they're certainly not the most respected people among us. Come to think of it, most politicians are lying, power-hungry crooks.
The ones you chose?
Yeah, they're always doing things we don't like. They use taxpayers' money to enrich themselves and their friends, and they never keep their promises to voters. They've been caught stealing and lying and taking bribes, and they mostly do what the big corporations want. Yeah, they're always doing stuff like that. They're completely corrupt. They're a bunch of lying crooks.
But you said that most humans know that stealing and beating each other up and killing are wrong. And you said that you have the power because you can change who's in charge. So why don't you just replace the lying, thieving, murderous, crooked politicians with some regular people?
Well, we don't try to elect lying crooks. It just always turns out that way. But we have to have a government because some humans are nasty and might kill or enslave or steal. Civilization just couldn't survive without government.
Let me get this straight. Because you're worried about the small number of nasty people that are willing to kill, enslave and steal, you think it's necessary for your survival to have a system where some humans among you, for a short while, get to call themselves the government, and they get to order everyone else around like slaves and, if they want, commit mass murder overseas, using money they stole using threats of violence. Politicians get to kill, enslave and steal, because if they didn't, someone else might? And you try to elect good, honest people to be politicians, but what happens every time is that the people you elect turn out to be corrupt, evil, lying crooks. That's your system.
Yeah, that's pretty much government.
Tell me more about your leaders. Who is the current leader of your species, and where are they leading you?
Well, we don't have just one leader for the whole planet. The world is divided into countries, and each country has a leader of its own and a government of its own.
You don't have one government that rules the whole planet?
No, this planet is really big, and there are billions of people on it. The world is divided up because people in different places want different kinds of leaders and governments.
How many countries are there?
A couple of hundred, I think.
So there are millions of people per country?
Yes, or hundreds of millions in some of them.
And all the people in a country live under one single government?
There can be layers of government, but there's only one government in each country. That's how it works.
But you can have multiple governments on the same planet?
Yes, and it's better that way. If you had a single government for the whole planet and it turned tyrannical, there'd be nowhere to escape to and no one to oppose it. And I wouldn't want to be ruled by a bunch of people living thousands of miles away on the other side of the planet. It's better having government more local, because then it's more accountable.
How far is it from here to where the rulers of this country live?
The capital of this country is hundreds of miles from here.
So you don't want to be ruled by a bunch of people living thousands of miles away, but you don't mind being ruled by a bunch of people living hundreds of miles away?
That's just how it is, I guess.
Why don't you and your neighbours set up your own country here, so you can keep a close eye on what the individuals acting as your government are doing?
I don't think our government would allow us to do that.
So you have these countries, some big and some small, and the individuals living in each country separately choose which people are going to be their politicians and act as government of that country.
Yes, although not everyone is lucky enough to live in a country where we get to choose our leaders. A lot of countries have kings or dictators or warlords running their government. People in undemocratic countries don't get to choose their leaders.
So you consider yourself lucky because you live under a democratic government, where you, along with millions of other people, get to vote, and whoever gets the highest number of votes becomes leader of the government, the gang that tells you what to do and robs you.
Yes, but there's more to it than that. Democracy isn't the only thing that's great about the government of this country. In fact, democracy itself is not an ideal system at all, everyone knows that. With a pure democracy, the majority rules, because the politicians do whatever the majority of people want them to do, and this can be a problem for minorities. We know this. The real reason why we're lucky in this country is that our government is not a pure democracy, but a republic. With a republic, minority rights are protected against the tyranny of the majority.
How?
Our rights are listed in our constitution, the document that established our government. It lays out how government is supposed to work. It says what government is allowed to do and what it isn't allowed to do.
What does it say government is allowed to do?
Government is allowed to collect taxes for things like national defence.
Hold on. The Constitution says that government is allowed to collect taxes. So it says that the individuals who are acting as government are allowed to rob everyone else using threats of violence.
Yeah, but only to do good things.
Where did the Constitution come from?
It was written by the founders of this country, the people who first set up the government.
The first politicians of the country.
Yes.
So a bunch of regular people just got together and wrote on a piece of paper that they're allowed to rob everyone else, as long as they call themselves government and call their robbery taxation. Then, because they have this special piece of paper, everyone just sits back and lets these guys rob them?
You're missing the point. The founders wrote the Constitution to restrain government. They made sure there was a separation of powers, so there were checks and balances in the system. They did this to strictly limit the power, size and scope of government. They made a list of things the government can do and must do, and everything else the government can't do. They even wrote about specific things that the government can't do, like violating the inalienable rights of the people to life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay, but I don't see why the piece of paper is so important. I mean, hypothetically, what if the majority of the people want government to do something that the Constitution says government shouldn't do? Couldn't the people vote in politicians who promise to do it for them, regardless of what the Constitution says? How does having your rights listed on an old document help protect your rights today?
Well, if the politicians who get voted in want to pass unconstitutional legislation, then the third branch of government, the judicial, will step in and not let the legislation pass. The founders recognised the problem of democracy, so they gave us a Supreme Court, and their role is to check whether legislation is constitutional or not.
But the Supreme Court is itself part of the government.
Yes, politicians get voted into positions in the executive and legislative branches, but the judicial branch is made up of judges. So if a majority supports the government violating the rights of a minority, the judges of the Supreme Court simply won't let it happen.
Are these Supreme Court judges just regular humans?
Yes.
So how does a regular human become a Supreme Court judge?
They are appointed.
By who?
The politicians.
But then, what is to stop the democratically elected politicians just appointing judges who will allow their popular but unconstitutional legislation to pass?
Well, they just aren't allowed to do that.
By who?
By the Constitution.
The piece of paper?
Yes, I admit it's not a perfect system. I suppose what you're saying could happen.
Does the government of this country, which you consider yourself lucky to live under, ever do things its own constitution explicitly forbids?
Yeah, a lot of things actually. The government is a lot bigger now than it was when the Constitution was written. The politicians pay lip service to the Constitution, but they trample over our rights anyway.
What about the Supreme Court?
I guess that system hasn't worked very well lately. Government does pass unconstitutional laws all the time. The separation of powers worked for a while though, it's not a bad system.
Powers were separate? I thought you said that the powers were all in branches of the same government.
Well, yes. The branches of government are totally independent and separate from each other. except that they're all part of the same organisation and all funded by taxation.
So when you said the system had checks and balances in it, you meant that the government would check itself and balance itself.
That was the idea.
So let me get this straight. A long time ago, a small bunch of regular humans had a meeting and created a document called a constitution that said that they can rob everyone else, millions of people, using threats of violence to make everyone obey their rules and commands. But so that the masses of the people would let them get away with this robbery and slavery, that small bunch also promised in the same document that there were some things the government would never do, and they described a way to structure government so as to restrain it. But over time, the promises have proven to be worthless, the restraints have proven to be useless, and government has grown significantly in size, power and scope, violating more and more of the rights of the people. It sounds to me that if the Constitution was written to constrain government, then it's been a complete failure.
Well, the real problem is that people just don't believe in the Constitution anymore. The Constitution only works when people know what it says and why it's important. If people just knew that, then they wouldn't vote for politicians who violate it. An informed populace, that's the only way to really restrain government.
Wait, you said you feel lucky because this country is a republic, not a democracy, and a republic has these supposed checks and balances that prevent government from violating people's rights, even when a majority wants to violate the rights of others. But now you're telling me a republic can only work if people refrain from electing politicians who will violate the rights of others in the first place. That's the same as a democracy. We're back to where we started.
I see your point.
Is there anywhere on the planet where government is, despite the imaginative labels, anything other than a gang of thieves and bullies?
But there'd be chaos without government.
I'm sure that's what they tell you.
The philosophy of liberty is based on the principle of self-ownership. You own your life. To deny this is to imply that another person has a higher claim on your life than you do. No other person or group of persons owns your life. Nor do you own the lives of others. You exist in time, future, present, and past. This is manifest in life, liberty, and the product of your life and liberty. To lose your life is to lose your future. To lose your liberty is to lose your present. And to lose the product of your life and liberty is to lose that portion of your past that produced it. A product of your life and your liberty is your property. Property is the fruit of your labour, the product of your time, energy, and talents. Property is that part of nature which you turn to valuable use. Property is the property of others that is given to you by voluntary exchange and mutual consent. Two people who exchange property voluntarily are both better off, or they wouldn't do it. Only they may rightfully make that decision for themselves. At times, some people use force or fraud to take from others without voluntary consent. The initiation of force and fraud. To take life
is murder. To take liberty is slavery. And to take property is theft. It is the same whether these actions are done by one person acting alone, by the many acting against the few, or even by officials with fine hats. You have the right to protect your own life, liberty, and justly acquired property from the forceful aggression of others. And you may ask others to help defend you. But you do not have the right to initiate force against the life, liberty, and property of others. Thus, you have no right to designate some person to initiate force against others on your behalf. You have the right to seek leaders for yourself. But you have no right to impose rulers onto others. No matter how officials are selected, they are only human beings, and they have no rights or claims that are higher than those of any other human beings. Regardless of the imaginative labels for their behaviour, or the numbers of people encouraging them, officials have no right to murder, to enslave, or to steal. You cannot give them any rights that you do not have yourself. Since you own your life, you are responsible for your life. You do not rent your life from others who demand your obedience. Nor are you a slave to others who demand your sacrifice. You choose your own goals based on your own values. Success and failure are both the necessary incentives to learn and to grow. Your action on behalf of others or their action on behalf of you is virtuous only when it is derived from voluntary mutual consent. For virtue can exist only where there is free choice. This is the basis of a truly free society. It is not only the most practical and humanitarian foundation for human action, it is also the most ethical. Problems in the world that arise from the initiation of force by government have a solution. The solution is for the people of the earth to stop asking government officials to initiate force on their behalf. Evil does not arise only from evil people, but also from good people who tolerate the initiation of force as a means to their own ends. In this manner, good people have empowered evil people throughout history. Having confidence in a free society is to focus on the process of discovery in the marketplace of values, rather than to focus on some imposed vision or goal. Using governmental force to impose a vision on others is intellectual sloth, and typically results in unintended, perverse consequences. Achieving a free society requires courage to think, to talk, and to act, especially when it is easier to do nothing. Slavery existed for thousands of years in all sorts of societies in all parts of the world. To imagine human social life without it required an extraordinary effort. Yet from time to time eccentrics emerged to oppose it, most of them arguing that slavery is a moral monstrosity, and therefore people should get rid of it. Such advocates generally elicited reactions ranging from gentle amusement to harsh scorn and even violent assault. When people bothered to give reasons for opposing the proposed abolition, they advanced various ideas. Here are 10 such ideas I have encountered in my reading. 1. Slavery is natural. People differ, and we must expect that those who are superior in a certain way, for example in intelligence, morality, knowledge, technological prowess, or capacity for fighting, will make themselves the masters of those who are inferior in this regard. Abraham Lincoln expressed this idea in one of his famous 1858 debates with Senator Stephen Douglas. There is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together there must be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man, am in favour of having the superior position assigned to the white race. 2. Slavery has always existed. This reason exemplifies the logical fallacy argumentum ad antiquitatem, the argument to antiquity or tradition. Nevertheless, it often persuaded people, especially those of a conservative bent. Even non-conservatives might give it weight on the quasi-Hayekian ground that although we do not understand why a social institution persists, its persistence may nonetheless be well grounded in a logic we have yet to understand. 3. Every society on earth has slavery. The unspoken corollary is that every society must have slavery. The pervasiveness of an institution seems to many people to constitute compelling proof of its necessity. Perhaps, as one variant maintains, every society has slavery because certain kinds of work are so difficult or degrading that no free person will do them, and therefore unless we have slaves to do these jobs, they will not get done. Someone, as the saying went in the Old South, has to be the mudsill, and free people will not tolerate serving in this capacity. 4. The slaves are not capable of taking care of themselves. This idea was popular in the United States in the late 18th and early 19th centuries among people such as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who regarded slavery as morally reprehensible, yet continued to hold slaves, and to obtain personal services from them and income from the products these servants, as they preferred to call them, were compelled to produce. It would be cruel to set free people who would then, at best, fall into destitution and suffering. 5. Without masters, the slaves will die off. This idea is the preceding one pushed to its extreme. Even after slavery was abolished in the United States in 1865, many people continued to voice this idea. Northern journalists travelling in the South immediately after the war reported that, indeed, the blacks were in a process of becoming extinct because of their high death rate, low birth rate, and miserable economic condition. Sad but true, some observers declared, the freed people really were too incompetent, lazy, or immoral to behave in ways consistent with their own group survival. 6. Where the common people are free, they are even worse off than slaves. This argument became popular in the South in the decades before the war between the states. Its leading exponent was the pro-slavery writer George Fitzhugh, whose book titles speak for themselves: Sociology for the South, or The Failure of Free Society, 1854, and Cannibals All, or Slaves Without Masters, 1857. Fitzhugh seems to have taken many of his ideas from the reactionary racist Scottish writer Thomas Carlyle. The expression wage slave still echoes this antebellum outlook. True to his sociological theories, Fitzhugh wanted to extend slavery in the United States to working-class white people for their own good. 7. Getting rid of slavery would occasion great bloodshed and other evils. In the United States, many people assumed that the slaveholders would never permit the termination of the slave system without an all-out fight to preserve it. Sure enough, when the Confederacy and the Union went to war, set aside that the immediate issue was not the abolition of slavery, but the secession of 11 southern states, great bloodshed and other evils did ensue. These tragic events seemed in many people's minds to validate the reason they had given for opposing abolition. They evidently overlooked that except in Haiti, slavery was abolished everywhere else in the Western Hemisphere without large-scale violence. 8. Without slavery, the former slaves would run amok, stealing, raping, killing, and generally causing mayhem. Preservation of social order therefore rules out the abolition of slavery. Southerners lived in dread of slave uprisings. Northerners in the mid-19th century found the situation in their own region already sufficiently intolerable, owing to the massive influx of drunken, brawling Irishmen into the country in the 1840s and 1850s. Throwing free blacks, whom the Irish generally disliked, into the mix would well-nigh guarantee social chaos. 9. Trying to get rid of slavery is foolishly utopian and impractical. Only a fuzzy-headed dreamer would advance such a cockamamie proposal. Serious people cannot afford to waste their time considering such far-fetched ideas. 10. Forget abolition. A far better plan is to keep the slaves sufficiently well fed, clothed, housed, and occasionally entertained, and to take their minds off their exploitation by encouraging them to focus on the better life that awaits them in the hereafter. We cannot expect fairness or justice in this life, but all of us, including the slaves, can aspire to a life of ease and joy in paradise. At one time, countless people found one or more of the foregoing reasons adequate grounds on which to oppose the abolition of slavery. Yet, in retrospect, these reasons seem shabby, more rationalizations than reasons. Today, these reasons, or very similar ones, are used by opponents of a different form of abolitionism, the proposal that government as we know it, monopolistic, individually non-consensual rule by an armed group that demands obedience and payment of taxes, be abolished. I leave it as an exercise for the reader to decide whether the foregoing reasons are more compelling in this regard than they were in regard to the proposed abolition of slavery.